Good morning, everybody. A few IT gremlins there with me getting started, but hopefully you can all hear me and see me okay just now. Jane, you can keep me right if I disappear. Tethering off phones is probably not the best idea in Teams, but we'll give it a go. So welcome to today's workshop, which you can see on the screen is workshop number 4. This is part of a kind of wider project through Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands predominantly. But it's going a little bit wider than that, and we've touched in various areas. So we've had several workshops up to this point. And we've got some other kind of content coming on this subject. But we'll crack on today with today's workshop. So from an agenda point of view, we've got an hour and a half, I think, in people's diaries, or at least an hour and 15. We'll see how that goes. This is a quick welcome and introduction from me, a wee bit of scene setting. Today we're joined by, and I'll introduce him a wee bit more later, but Barry Munro from Munro Business Consultancy and Jim Lockhart from Armstrong Watson. So I'll introduce them a little bit. They're going to speak today for us, and between those we'll obviously get a few more or some questions, discussion, and then obviously we'll close at the end. So that's our very basic agenda today. So I'm kind of guessing, or I'm thinking that most on today's call are probably aware of CeeD. So I'll make this brief. There might be a few who are a little bit unaware, or for a refresher. CeeD have been in existence for getting on for 20 years now. Won't be long before that mark is hit. And essentially a not-for-profit membership organisation with a fundamental aim for peer-to-peer learning through best practice and knowledge sharing, exactly what we're doing today. And that, I suppose you could say, could be on the right-hand side of our model there. So CeeD tools are really to support through events, signposting, connections, proactive connections, not just signposting, and also through education. So on that membership side, or the member expert side, certainly best practice sharing and site tours, workshops, and very well known for that type of activity. And more in the recent years for a lot of learning and development opportunity through the Growth 500 programme, specialist clinics, events, executive leadership. I've added another on there recently. We've introduced a programme called Mentoring Mix-Up, and I think that probably brings those two strands together, where we bring members and the external experts together. And it's very much an active or proactive programme based around mentoring, but brings mentors and mentees from different businesses, different sectors, different industries together, and shares that around about certain themes. So I think very important to put on there, and a sort of key new part of CeeD going forward. So a fundamental part of CeeD for the last year or two has been around about something called the Advancing Manufacturing Cluster Fund, which is a programme that in 2020 CeeD became the programme manager for. And it's a government programme, and essentially has generated 12 projects, regional specialist projects. You can see them down the left-hand side there, focusing on manufacturing excellence through some of the hubs that are available, and also some specialist support through things like medical devices or battery storage, and you can see them as well as I can read them. Fully funded and free at source to SMEs to tap into, and many have since the programme started. So I'm sure you're all aware of that, but worth a wee reminder, and obviously something we can say more on at another time if you need. So I think I mentioned that this session was part of a wider project. That wider project, as I say, was through Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise initially. It's tapped into different areas now, but it was to better understand what's going on in terms of CI investment. Where are the barriers? Where are the blockers? We've done that through developing initially some baseline measures, but then developing some best practice case studies. So for those who have been on previous workshops, you'll have heard from businesses like Diodes, from Woodward Aircraft Engineering, Dover Fueling, etc. And some great practice, some great best practice out there in terms of CI, investing in CI. So the challenge today really is that barriers and blockers. So we're looking at that from two fronts, people and process side and also the investment side, the financial side. So they can be linked, but they're quite independent and they've got some different routes to tackle those. And hopefully looking to inspire beyond this and evolve a bit of a legacy benefit in terms of some ongoing action. So that's really where we're sitting today in terms of the workshop. So I mentioned there's some baseline measures. I thought this would be a good sort of just a base for starting off from today. So we, a number of months ago, went out to some organisations and asked them, well, who is investing in continuous improvement? And interestingly, given the challenges that we're all facing right now, still over 3/4 of business are investing in continuous improvement. Now, continuous improvement can mean different things to different people. We've already talked about it over previous workshops. But in terms of that basic question, so it's quite a positive picture, but still a quarter not. So to explore a couple of the themes that came out of that. For those that are investing, quite interesting, lots of positive factors there, as you might expect, particularly productivity, looking to drive productivity, lots of performance improvement themes there that people have scored highly on. Interestingly, only a quarter doing it really are in their minds to survive. So most are already perhaps in a position where they're still looking to develop and grow their business. But obviously these are fairly basic measures, but they give us a good platform to work from. So on the other side of that, in terms of barriers and blockers, that's it. What barriers or challenges would your organisation need to overcome? So this is a wee bit of what we're talking about today, and this is where why we've brought Jim and Barry today to the session. Quite a wee bit in culture there. Businesses still feel their culture is probably not in the right place for developing continuous improvement. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but they see that as a barrier or a blocker. A wee bit there on implementation capability. Maybe people not sure exactly what that might be, but also an internal financial constraints. So having the finance, having the investment, having the money to be able to invest, and that might be in people's time as much as investment in hard equipment or facilities or some kind of improvement. Changing priorities has always been there, or as a common one just now, but we're going to focus on that finance and sort of culture or implementation side today. So this was an interesting quote for introduced speakers. Just very quickly, I think the context I'm going to use it in was different from the context that was used here. It was kind of recently in terms of some, you can see there it's from the Confederation of Shipbuilding Engineering Unions, so it's kind of perhaps coming from a different angle. But I think it's very true. People don't invest if there's uncertainty, or at least there's a perceived higher risk. And I'd rather batten down the hatches and just see things out. And if ever there was a time for that, it's been the last 2 or 3 years. And with things that are happening just now, starting with a pandemic and all that we've faced and currently facing just now, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty. And people, if they can guarantee a reasonable level of return, they can see certainty, then they'll put the investment in. So I think what we're trying to do here is explore maybe some of the levers that people can control and can do something about, and perhaps create a wee bit of certainty to help that investment. So things like, where are the routes to funding for investment? Where can we unlock that? And also where can we, or how can we develop our teams and our companies to create that better culture to drive that internal continuous improvement? So I thought that was quite a good quote, maybe not in the context I'm using it for today. So just briefly then to introduce our speakers. So we've got Barry Munro and Jim Lockhart with us today. So Barry's a qualified CI and BI practitioner, lots of experience across different organisations, from SMEs through to bigger multinationals, various different industries. And interestingly for today, and this is why I wanted Barry to talk to us today, is he's been involved both in-house in terms of driving continuous improvement, part of teams to do that, leading that, facilitating that, but also involved externally, both with agency and funded support avenues. So we're all aware of people like SMAS, for example. So Barry was part of that team, but also in driving his own private consultancy. So all of these routes are different routes, but they're all applicable at different times, and that's what Barry looked to take us through. And obviously focused on that delivering process improvement, business excellence, and developing sustainable CI culture. And that's what a lot of what we're focused on. Jim is an old friend of mine, a qualified chartered accountant, worked in different environments, from independent practice, Big Four firm, had his own firm as well. Industry experience, I suppose, which is very relevant, and again, why asking Jim today, through positions in manufacturing and also in design. So I think very relevant coming from both those backgrounds. Breadth of knowledge, supporting business, and looking to understand and unlock that financial resources, helping them, advising them in that field. So Jim will look to kind of develop some of those avenues and kind of make people aware, maybe all of or some of the main routes to try and unlock that investment. So I think that's really all from me. You really want to hear from, I'd certainly do, from Barry and Jim. So I think plan was to start with Barry. I don't know if I kind of missed the initial thing. Barry, are you able to share your slides? Just take over and share yours.
Certainly can, David. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Barry.
Yeah, sorry, the little button to stop presenting, I can't see it, but don't worry, hopefully you can still share yours, Barry.
I'm just putting them up just now, so you can let me know.
There we go.
Did they come up okay?
That's us, yep. Good to go, Barry, thank you.
All right, cheers. Okay, thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. So I've got a few slides to go through here. David's already kind of covered this, but it was just, I guess, a little bit of an introduction from myself. So like David said, I've been running my own consultancy company for about the past 5 years. I won't go into the experience I've got, but I've had various different positions over the years in various industries as well, as you can see there. All round about continuous improvement or business transformation. And I think the key thing that I'd like to try to cover today, or David asked me to cover today, was just that last bullet point down there. When I added it up, just kind of frightening. I think that picture you had of me, David, was quite an old one. I should maybe have sent you a newer one, because I think I've had round about, in different positions, 10 years in-house CI type positions over the years. Spent about 5 years doing a few different working with a few different organisations, which was agency stroke funded support, and then, as I say, I've had the consultancy business for the last 5 years. And there's obviously good points and bad points with each of those kind of options if you're looking to start CI in your company, or progress it, or get to best practice or whatever. So what I'm going to try and do is cover my thoughts on that, basically. Just before I kind of go into it, it's already been covered, I think, in some of the previous workshops, but it's something I do find quite a lot when I go into companies. It's really important before you start thinking about how you're going to do it, is what do you want to do, where are you, and where do you want to get to? And it sounds pretty obvious to say, but quite often it's maybe not been thought through as clearly as it could have been. So in terms of continuous improvement, I kind of summarise it really into sort of 3 key areas, in terms of what companies tend to want to do with it and try and achieve. So it's, it can be very much focused on cost saving and reductions. It can be looking at people, developing the capability within the company and how they understand things and how they solve their own problems. And it can also be about the overall culture or maturity of the company. So it can be one of these things, it can be two of them, it can be a mix of all three, but it's obviously important to know where you want to go, and then the other side of that is obviously, well, where are you now? So again, some of this has already been covered in the previous workshops, but you know, how is continuous improvement perceived in the company? How reactive are you versus proactive? How much time do people have to be a bit more proactive in their work and in their roles? And is there a real need or pressure for change? You know, is there some kind of rationale there that you can use to encourage some type of change in the way you do things? So there's a wee model there on the right, which is, you know, some people might be aware of it. It's my version of a kind of well-known coaching model, but I'll tend to kind of use that as a starting point just to get a bit of clarity in terms of what companies are looking for, what they want to do. And then maybe once that's a bit clearer, as I say, there's, you know, I'm going to cover these three areas. So just to kind of be clear on what I'm saying each of these are. In-house resource, so that's where you would have somebody in the company, at least a leader coordinating things, but potentially a small team or large team of CI professionals working full time. Agency funded support is obviously external support, but that would be through perhaps government schemes or industry schemes where you get some type of funding associated with it to encourage you. And then consultancy services, again, external support, but from independent consultancies or consultants. So for each of those areas, the next few slides, I've just tried to show, I guess, and it's my perception, so you know, see if it generates a wee bit of debate, but what I think is good in these options, what's not so good in these options, and I've also just tried to kind of do a very brief kind of a case study type thing for each option as well, in terms of, you know, a good example and a not so good example within each of them. So hopefully that makes some sense. So in-house resource, so obviously when you've got somebody, a team or someone full time, what are some of the positives of that? Well, usually it's someone, the people tend to be, not all the time, but they tend to be kind of promoted through the company. So they've usually got a reasonably good understanding of what goes on. So they've got a pretty in-depth process knowledge, which is always an advantage when you're trying to make changes to processes and improve things. You would obviously have somebody dedicated on improvement on a full-time basis rather than maybe part-time with some of the other options. I think one of the key things is they can be, if you have somebody internally, then obviously they know what goes on, so they're aware of the culture of the company. They maybe know how to manage and effect change in a way that works, and also, you know, obviously if it's part of their full-time role, they're staying up to date, they're trying to keep things alive, keep driving things on. Some of the downsides of that, which I've certainly seen, you may have, I'm sure you have seen yourselves, but as soon as you have something internal defined as some type of continuous improvement function, quite often it can, you know, very quickly become something that's seen as separate. So, you know, we've got operations and we've got engineering and then we've got CI. It's not necessarily seen as a joint initiative, let's say, because the internal people do tend to have a lot of that process knowledge. Instead of using them more to encourage change or you know, implement maybe new ways of working, they end up being used quite often as just a troubleshooter. If there's a problem on an area or on a line, you know, get the CI person onto it, because, you know, they understand the process, so they end up really just looking at processes and trying to make sort of small improvements there. Depending on their experience, I guess, they might find it a little bit difficult to encourage change. It depends what their experience is in the company, what their level of influence is, I guess. So all of that kind of results in often a focus purely on just getting some results. Let's get some savings, and obviously it's an additional fixed labour cost. You can't switch it on or switch it off, or certainly not very easily. And then I guess the last one I've got down there, and I have heard people say this to me, you know, sometimes you don't really know why they have some CI people on in their team or on site or as part of the organisation, but other companies have it, so I guess we should have it. So I guess a lot of that comes back to just understanding where you are and what is it you're actually wanting to achieve. So as I said, a couple of examples. Hopefully you can see this all right. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I guess it was just to try to give a flavour from my experience of what works well, what doesn't work so well for each of these options. So in terms of in-house, just to kind of set the scene, this particular example, there was an investment made in a kind of group CI role. There was a team in place across the company. It was kind of widespread company across the UK. But the team, the CI people that were there were predominantly, if not 100%, really just used as troubleshooters until this investment was made in the group role. The key objective was obviously to try and align that team a bit better, provide some direction where we wanted to go from a CI perspective, and then, you know, start to evolve it into a bit more of a CI culture where they weren't just troubleshooters, but they were actually leading things and coaching people on the sites. In terms of the implementation part, I've just listed a few things which I thought were quite key. So the most important one, probably, there was very high engagement and support from, you know, the senior leadership in the company, and it was there on a consistent basis for certainly a good number of years. We clarified some of the roles and responsibilities, so changed them maybe a bit what we were expecting from the CI team. Developed a sort of 3-year plan, so it wasn't short term. It wasn't let's do this and then see where we get to. There was a, you know, reasonably structured plan for the next 3 years, and then as part of that plan, the focus was purely on, and nothing else but some real, what people might view as basics of CI, but, you know, they are sometimes quite difficult to get in and get embedded, but things like 5S, the meetings, the problem solving processes. So the outcomes of that one, there was some new ways of working. We could actually measure the results from CI and all the initiatives much better, so that kind of, you know, just helped with kind of justifying things, I guess. We developed an internal programme so that we could actually train up people in other functions and other roles, and that helped with sort of integrating you know, all the functions, I guess, into kind of a one direction. So as I say, I'm not going to get into all the detail of that, but that was a good example. The key reason I think that was good was the engagement and support for the senior team, and a kind of clear plan over a longer term, so that we kind of knew where we were going. One from an in-house resource that maybe wasn't so good, similar kind of a situation, major investment. There was various CI at multiple sites across this company. They had tried various things over the years, various initiatives, and with various different names, and this was the latest one. The objective was to really implement a new way of working across the company, but focusing much more on the continuous improvement teams, coaching and supporting leadership teams on sites, in a way of working that was a bit more CI orientated. In terms of implementation, it's probably one of the most well-defined CI systems and standards I've ever been involved in or seen. The quality of it was excellent, but the initial focus was purely on individuals' capability and kind of maturity, and it was not focused on really any kind of results or business benefits. It's at least in the early stages, and I think part of that, because of that, there was a bit of, you know, lack of understanding of what was the need for it and buy-in from the leadership sites. Outcomes, there was some really good ways of working, where it did improve, but as I say, because it wasn't linked closely enough to the results, it was low priority versus other business priorities, and what ended up after a period of time, the CI resource did actually end up reverting back to being troubleshooters, and there was a bit of rationalisation and restructure of that whole programme. Why did that one not work so well? As I've already highlighted it there, but it was, for me, it was purely not a balanced focus. Only it wasn't focused with results and benefits included in it until a very late stage. So we never really get full buy-in. Second option, agency funded support. So I'll just kind of run through some of these, but maybe not go through them all in terms of what's good about it. It can be free, which is obviously good, or certainly low cost because you're getting some funding. Very good usually for increasing awareness and training, developing employees, depending on the support and the programme that you maybe can get involved in. There can either be very kind of industry specific programmes, which some people like because it's related to the industry that they're in, but equally so you can get other ones where you know, you get people from different companies, different industries sharing their knowledge and stuff, which is obviously you know, a good thing as well. And you can get access to, usually you can get signposted or access to further grants, further services. What's not so good, again, this is, you know, I guess what I've seen, you can get some people that are very, very knowledgeable and very good that are doing these type of offerings, but again, it can be quite varying in terms of what you actually get, because it's sometimes low cost or sometimes free. There can be a bit of lack of commitment from whoever's sponsoring it, so therefore you know, people maybe get awareness and maybe gets trained in some way, but there's very little implementation and impact for the business, and it can be quite a rigid offering as well, or a bit bureaucratic with a lot of paperwork and things like that to fill in potentially, and usually short term. It's a short term focus to kind of give a little bit of a boost to companies, but they're not going to kind of look at it in a longer term thing. So good example, bad example for this. So this is the what I thought was a reasonably good one. A small SME which had a lot of challenges, but a real desire to implement best practice. This was a company that had come up with sort of new technology, new processes. So we're kind of early on, but we're having to ramp up very quickly. So they wanted general awareness of best practice in terms of manufacturing and continuous improvement, and wanted to really focus on their process and map that out and be clear about what it had to be and what it needed to be in the future. So some of the key steps in implementation, there was some awareness sessions which were ran, but that was with the full management team. Everybody was included, you know, and then they actually invested a good amount of time in sort of the next couple of steps that we did, which was a bit of collaborative mapping out of the process end to end. And then once that was done, we actually agreed some key projects and objectives which were assigned to those individuals for them to start implementing. Outcome of that, they had a bit more of a structured approach and how to do things. There was some quick wins and quick gains that came out of the sort of process mapping exercise that we did. And then a key part was that there was ongoing coaching and support. So once the projects were assigned, there was a period of kind of ongoing support with them to make sure that some of that stuff at least got to a point where it was getting implemented reasonably well. So the key good points of that, I think, were obviously the commitment of the company, making the resource available, and then actually assigning the projects and looking for a little bit of further on support to get things actually implemented. A not so good example, let's say, for agency funded support. This was a programme focused on SMEs again, suppliers to a particular industry, and it was quite a comprehensive programme, really looking at suppliers that could grow their businesses quite dramatically and helping them, you know, understand how to transform to actually meet those growth targets. So there was dedicated teams of at least about 4 or 5 people that were put on site with these companies, and as I say, the objective was to provide business transformation support, but really focused on coaching the teams, the leaders on the sites. During implementation, there was a very comprehensive diagnostic part of it, which took about 12 weeks, and then after that 12 weeks, the company would get either selected or not selected to be on the programme, which then went on for a longer period of time, and that's where some of these longer term work streams were agreed. There was third-party training providers which were brought in as well as a kind of structured programme through the whole thing. But overall, I'll maybe come back to that point, but generally there was a lack of commitment, time and resource from the companies that were involved in it. So I'll come back to that in a minute. The outcome, there was some short-term successes, but there was a minimal change as far as I was concerned anyway in the companies. What they actually needed was some actual hands-on support, not a sort of coaching approach. The companies didn't have the time and the resources and the commitment, you know, to sit down and be offered coaching support. It was more a hands-on thing that they actually really needed. So that's why this kind of failed a little bit. And the other part of it, the lack of commitment. As I say, it was a comprehensive programme, but effectively it was free for the companies, and therefore I don't think it was ever seen as a real priority for them, certainly from a lot of the leadership and management teams. And then the last one, consultancy services. What can be good about that? Well, if you pick the right person, right company, they should have a lot of influence and experience. I've had it on both sides where, you know, a consultant comes in and nobody will listen to you if you're internally in the company, but a consultant will come in and say something, and then suddenly it's the right thing to do. And as I say, I've had it from both sides. So they can bring that influence, which is sometimes needed. Fixed, flexible costs. They can bring a bit of an understanding of what best practice is and what's out there, because they should hopefully have seen quite a few things in their experiences. Can bring a bit of objectivity, I guess, to what you're doing, because they're not you know, internal. They've not got any other agenda apart from obviously trying to find ways of helping companies improve and implement CI, and they can provide a bit of an injection of pace or direction sometimes as well, in terms of what's the next step or the next stage for a company. What's not so good about it, it's always going to be obviously higher cost or a higher rate. There is also some questions there, and I would seen it myself, but in terms of, you know, the expertise, so it comes back to making sure you pick the right people and the right companies, and if you do find somebody that you can work with quite well, maybe availability of service, they can't always be on demand because maybe they're busy with other things as well. So, you know, it kind of, if you need to get something done quite quickly, sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge, and particularly with bigger consultancies, I guess, there can be a bit of a kind of limited customization. They want to give you a kind of one-size-fits-all offering for certain areas or certain things, and maybe that doesn't quite fit with what the company actually is needing at that point in time. And then a couple of examples on this one. Excuse me, good example. Ongoing relationship. So I think that's a key thing. This is an ongoing thing with a small company, but they kind of understood where they were. They're very reactive. They've got desire to grow, but they knew they needed a bit more of a structured approach in order to meet these growth targets that they had. So the objective was to develop an overall transformation plan, taking into account the capabilities and capacities of operations to match the growth. During the implementation, so this was spread out over a reasonably long period of time, 4 to 6 months, doing several workshops. Full management team was involved, and there was very active and visible sponsorship from the managing director. Outcome of that, we had a 3-year transformation plan with phased objectives and initiatives for operations, and very clearly defined owners, objectives, timescales, and now currently doing some, you know, ongoing implementation support. The reason why I would say that was a good example, you know, it was spread over a longer period of time. It wasn't short and sharp, so it gave time for people to kind of, I guess, understand it and grow with it. full management team, and again the very visible sponsorship for the managing director. And then my last example, not so good one for consultancy, specialised SME had done kind of sporadic CI activities in the past. I guess didn't really have a clear plan, but thought changeovers was the next kind of a thing that they should be doing or looking at. So the objective was to kind of deliver some workshops around about the changeovers and provide an ongoing methodology for them. Implementation, this was done purely as a 1 week Kaizen. There was some but limited sponsorship for the leaders on site. And obviously, with it being a 1 week kind of short, sharp thing, there was some time to do some quick wins, but not a great amount of time to really look at actually implementing the improvements that were identified. So the outcome was, yeah, they had a methodology, we got some improvements identified, but it really ended up being a one-off exercise because there was no real kind of a longer term plan there in terms of where were they going and what was the next steps. So that was really why I would say it wasn't such a great example. And I've just got a few slides to finish now. But in general, so there's those three options, obviously. Maybe there's others, but they're the ones we decided to kind of a look at, and there's good points and bad points with them. I guess something I've always kind of stuck with is these sort of 5 critical success factors. So if you're trying to do something around about CI, I think these things are pretty good and pretty standard and should always be thought about. Why is there a need to improve? Make sure that's clear. Where do you want to be? So I've already touched on this, but where do you want to be and what is it you want to try and achieve? How is it you're going to get there? What are the kind of ways of working, things you're going to put in place, the standards to kind of achieve it? Who's actually going to be involved and what is actually expected of them? And then I kind of taking all of that, putting it into some kind of longer term structured action plan. When are things going to happen, so that you can give people a kind of view of what the plan is going forward, sort of longer term. And some of you might have seen something similar to this before. This is that's my version, I guess, of a change model that was done years ago. But I've tweaked it a wee bit, but you'll get the idea of it. So you get those 5 critical success factors up the top, which I think you have to have some type of sustainable CI culture in your business. And then the sort of the ones that as it's greyed out going down, if you don't have one of those things, the things on the right are the things you usually end up getting. So if you don't have any real need for it or pressure to change, you'll get slow, gradual change at best. If you don't have a kind of a vision of where you want to go, it will maybe start fast, and you'll maybe do implement a few tools or techniques, a bit like that changeover example that I mentioned earlier there. But then it'll kind of fade away. If you don't have a kind of a standard way of doing things and asking people to do it in a consistent way that you can transfer knowledge between people, you're going to get inconsistency and unpredictability in the results. Very important one. If you don't train your people and make sure they're involved in what you're expecting of them, they're going to try, but they're going to get frustrated because they're not getting the right development to do what's been asked of them. And then the last one, if you don't have a structured action plan, longer term, again, you'll get a bit of a false start, but then there's no real momentum. You don't know what the next step is and the next stage is. And then this is my last slide. I've hopefully haven't took too long, but I just try to take those 3 options and say, well, in my view, maybe where would you put them, depending on where you are, what's the best option to pick. So if you're starting out in terms of continuous improvement in your business and just looking to kind of raise some awareness, generate some quick wins, probably going down some sort of funded support, getting some training is the best place to kind of start out, get people a bit aware of some tools and techniques and things, encourage them to use them. If you're starting to gain a bit of momentum and really, focusing a bit more on, real savings or sort of medium to longer term savings and results and wanting to implement and standardise maybe some tools and techniques, then potentially consultancy services might be your best option so that they can, coach one-to-one or one-to-team people in the organisation and help them through some improvement projects. So you're really getting to a point where you're really creating change and really starting to implement more of a CI culture, changing ways of working or focusing on ways of working, have clear standards and processes. I think it's really at that point. You can have it at any point, obviously, but certainly at that point, having some type of internal resource at least to kind of coordinate things, I think is an important thing to have. And then, you know, the ultimate goal, achieving excellence and best practice, and maybe start to think about maturity and roadmaps and where you're going in the future. You know, to do all of that, pretty much all companies that do are I guess close to that or trying to achieve that will use all three of these kind of offerings where they see it's relevant. I think that's me rambled on long enough, so that's me. So I don't know if there's any questions, but hopefully that was useful.
You know, and I think the leadership engagement is significant. I think you can highlight that where it works well, you have it. Where it doesn't work well, you probably don't have it, and they're not as engaged or bought in as sponsors or leaders. You know, and including and engaging everyone in the business, I think is really important, whatever route, whether it's, you know, from an external or internal. If everybody's not in it and has some kind of skin in the game, so to speak, it is difficult. I suppose all the other business pressures as well are pushing from the other side of things as to, you know, how much change or how much do we have to change, but it's back to that having a clear plan. So I'll without creating the wall of silence, I'll
There
kind of
was
just
one hand up, David.
Yep,
Stuart,
okay.
did you want to ask a question? Stuart
Yeah,
Thompson?
thanks. That was great, Barry. Thanks very much for that. Stuart Thompson from South of Scotland Enterprise. It's for the last several years since I kind of saw my business come into work for SE and latterly SOSI, I've been trying to champion the benefits of CI, because as I see it from my experience, and there was nothing really I did more than spend less money on and invested other than time to get such results. But the one thing that I found that with clients I deal with that you must have in the first instance is the buy-in of the leadership team. I think if you've got the chief executive buying into it, you know, and sticking with it, and instead of just saying that sounds like a great idea, we'll get so and so to deal with it. If they can, you know, take that leadership route, it does, in my experience, kind of work better, if you like, because they're kind of adopting that much more as a, because they obviously you're articulating to them the benefits of it, taking costs out of, you know, improving the bottom line, that type of thing, rather than just it being an exercise and kind of moving along with the rest of the staff. I think the quality of leadership and the commitment from the leadership team has to be there. I don't know what you think about that, Barry.
Totally, yeah, definitely, totally agree. I mean, through those examples, I guess that I tried to pull out there. You know, the ones that were good, and David already mentioned there, but the ones that it doesn't matter what option really you do. You know, it's whatever's right for your business. But the options where it works well are when you've got somebody at the very top engaged and wanting to do it. You know, and sometimes that, you know, sometimes it's difficult to actually know that or see it, because quite a lot of people will say they're engaged in it and they want to do it and whatever, but you know, it's the, you know, it's not just saying it, it's them actually coming and doing something and being there and getting involved. And it's, you know, if people are like that, yeah, it doesn't really matter what you do, to be honest. That will make a huge difference. You know, the downside of that is obviously, you know, I've been in places where that's there, and then somebody moves on to a new role and you get somebody else that comes in and maybe isn't as bought in, and then that, you know, the whole dynamic shifts and changes, so it is a challenge. But yeah, you know, if somebody's serious about it, they need to be, and you need to have that buy-in from the very top of your company. Yeah.
And I think the kind of communication and the messaging in this, you know, we're not in there to say your systems are terrible and you're so inefficient. I think I've tried to say, you've got a great company here, your processes are working well, but, you know, would you consider you know, the CI route in terms of making things better. You know, you don't have to change much. It's just lots and lots of different small elements as we go along to change that will do that. And you probably don't have to invest a lot of money, just more people's time.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Stuart. Yeah, totally agree. That's something from my experience. You need everybody in the business from the top through to be in this in some way and invested in it for it to be a success. It's not always easy to do. There's no, you know, easy answer for that. Any other comments? I can't see any hands, Jane, but if there's anything.
No, I think that
anybody
was
else
it.
wants?
Want to move on to the next speaker?
Okay. Okay. So seems a wee while since I introduced him, but also let him introduce himself really. But can I hand over to Jim Lockhart, if you're still with us, Jim? Yep. Can share your. I think your slides are there.
Is that coming through okay?
It has, yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks, David, and thanks, Barry. That was really insightful as well. Interestingly, there's probably quite a bit of overlap. Just, I guess, in that the overall idea of it and getting people bought into strategy for continuous improvement in there. So, I mean, just as David said, I'm Jim Lockhart. I lead the Glasgow office of Armstrong Watson accountants. We're a firm with 17 offices from Leeds up to, or actually now Manchester up to Glasgow, dealing mainly with family and owner managed businesses. Yeah, I've got quite a long career in the accountancy game, but I did do a spell in industry as part of the finance team in a manufacturing PLC, and having worked with other manufacturing clients over the years. So I've got a wee bit of insight in this. One of the things that we did do at, it was Project Office Furniture was the name of the company. We did a continuous improvement project while I was there, and I was part of that team, which gave me a bit of an insight into into this realm. What I'm looking at over the next 10-15 minutes will be how you fund it. Some of the barriers to putting a program in place and maybe implementing some of the continuous improvement. Is how do you fund it? How do you best fund it? And how do you get the best bang for your buck as you're going through it? So we're going to look at what it is, why we do it, and how you go around getting these projects funded. So that should give you an idea of routes to get funds raised to implement the project. So as I said, look at why, look at what, and look at how over the next wee while. So starting with the why, continuous improvement, you will require some investment. That's financial investment, investment of time, because it will take it will take people's time. It's a project in itself, and there may be capital requirements as you go through that. If you identify that there's maybe new bits of equipment that you need, or you need to upgrade that equipment, so there will be investment in there, and an investment of management time to get that through. If you fail to invest in it, then you won't get the full benefit. You may get some benefit, but you will not get the full benefit of implementing that program, that project or the program. So it's good to work out what investment is required in advance of commencing. Ultimately, this should improve profitability. It will improve profitability. It can improve competitiveness. We all operate in very competitive markets, and therefore, any advantage that we can gain is worth pursuing on there. But ultimately, for business, it's a choice. Do you stick with what you've got? You may have tried and tested methods of doing, of conducting your business, which have worked forever. Has the market moving around about that, or will what you're doing fulfil you ongoing, or do you twist and do you take that opportunity to improve what you're doing, change what you're doing ever so slightly, and that may give you a competitive advantage. So the benefits of that, you invest in it properly, you maximise your CI project, and you can accelerate it and take it at the pace that you need. Going back to that profitability and competitive market element, you're looking at business resilience and risk management. There's always a risk that your competitor is about to do something that you've not thought about, and that so David mentioned earlier on survival. In some cases, doing the same things as you have been doing may work, and it may work forever. It may be that something new comes into the market which breaks that model for you. So it's probably incumbent upon management to keep improving and keep thinking forward on how to do things better. And that ultimately that will improve your profitability in there as well. So best return for stakeholders within there. So what does that investment look like? Well, we're looking at investing in people, training our staff. It's key that the management teams understand what they're doing, that the people involved in the project and probably the business understand what they're doing, and the benefits of that to them. So that's going to take investment in themselves, whether that's time and people, let's say off of their day job, or getting consultants in order to train them. These are all elements that will require investment by the business. Now, there may be grants available to support that, or that can be self-funded out of resources that are there. But again, these dynamics it's very important that the business and the management understand where that money is coming from and what grants are available. It may also involve investing in plant and machinery. So new kit, perhaps new technology in order to improve processes or support the improved processes. And how do you do that? Again, do you go to external funding? Are there tax incentives to encourage you to invest in more plant and machinery? Are there any other grants available that will help you, again, to get that plant machinery installed, up and running and delivering benefit for the business? Moving on to the how, Barry's mentioned it and David's mentioned it as well. It's hugely important that this is part of the strategic plan. You can implement bits of continuous improvement here and there, but if it's not part of an overall strategy, then it can lack impact, and it would maybe wither on the vine ultimately. So as a management team, it's really important that that's built into the strategic plan for the business. If it's in the strategic plan, that would also help to keep the management engaged and to keep that on track and make sure that it's visible, and there's continued engagement from the senior management in the organisation. So then you want to assess the project, you want to cost it, you want to forecast it, being realistic about what investment is required. And that might, you're costing it to see what the investment's required, and then forecasting that and see how it fits in with the rest of the plans for the business. Only by doing that, you'll be able to determine the best course of action in implementing the project, and it will also determine the investment required. So how much funding are you going to require in order to deliver this project? Once you know how much investment is required, you can assess your sources of funding. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the sources of funding on the next slide. But is that asset financing for new assets? How's the overall business funded? Are there bigger loans in place which are using to fund the business in general? But there are various routes to capital in there. Interestingly, I saw that Joe had put up at the start about there a lot of capital being around. What we've found is that during COVID, a lot of CBILS loans were taken out, and not necessarily having a great amount of things to do with them. So there's a lot of capital in the market which is ready to go in, but businesses haven't been calling on it because throughout COVID, conversely, they have funded themselves quite adequately for that period of time. There's also tax incentives available, and it shouldn't be underestimated, the value of these. If you are investing in new kit, there are capital allowances available, which up until 1st of April 2023 are currently sitting there. There's a super deduction in place from a capital allowances perspective, which gives you 130% tax deduction on qualifying plant and equipment, which is hugely valuable and an incentive for companies to invest in kit and new plant and machinery in there. And then you're also considering whether there's any research and development going on within that project as well. Is it developing anything that would qualify for research and development reliefs, which are also very generous and can provide cash benefits to the company as well. So that can form part of your investment decision. Moving on to funding. How do you fund these projects? You can self-fund. If you have got sufficient cash flow and sufficient resources within the company, you can fund out of there. That's a decision to be made. You've got to be very careful about how you match the funding, what you're using that funding for. But the general rule would be, if you're investing in a long-term asset, use longer-term funding and try and match the funding with that asset. But that's not to say that if you have got sufficient reserves that you can pull that out of your current cash flows. Looking at external funding, to finance the asset through HP or leasing, again, that lets you get kit in advance of when you would maybe, if in the old days when you would save up for it, you might be able to get that early and start generating the benefits of that at an earlier juncture. Or is it an overall funding package for the business? How does your business deal with with its overall working capital requirements? Through that invoice discounting or general overdraft. These are all things that are specific to businesses and specific to situations within there. There's also grants. Now the grants landscape changes regularly, and it's changed significantly during COVID. So there are grants available if you can find them, but that with that shifting landscape, you'd be relying on finding the right grant and it being available at that time. And as we said, tax incentives are there, and these are all considerations when you're looking at how you would fund that project. So there's quite a lot to do. And the question, who do you speak to? Who's got the knowledge to point you in the right direction? Look at trade organisations and trade networks. CeeD are putting this CeeD's workshops on just now, and they with the view to signposting. There's loads and loads of knowledge within these business. So if you're looking to do it, there are other companies that have done it that you'll be able to draw on their experience of doing that. There's also the agency support, so Scottish Enterprise, South of Scotland, Highlands and Islands. To get contact with them, again, they've got a lot of knowledge about what's going on around about the geography of the country and beyond. So again, to get hooked in with them, that is a wealth of knowledge that can point you in the right direction. Your professional network, so your professional providers, your accountants, your lawyers, who will have clients who are probably in the same position or will have dealt with people in the same position in the past. Or at present. So making best use of your professional network and their contacts, and that again can bring the right level of knowledge to the business. Another thing might be the supplier network. The examples where a supplier will come in with a new bit of kit which will make your processes more efficient and maybe enable you to enter a market that you've not been able to enter before. A very kind of basic example would be when the supplier business I'm aware of who were making big batch deliveries for their clients or the customers, and they wouldn't do smaller batch because they couldn't get the packaging labelled without a lot of manual input. The supplier said to them, we've got some new machinery which will allow you to increase your throughput and enable you to produce small batch of what it is you're manufacturing. And that's opened up a whole new market to them. Now, they hadn't thought about doing it. It was the supplier that pushed that to them. So there is knowledge everywhere of how you might be able to do things slightly differently. And there's businesses on this call, varying sizes, varying maturities. All of there's no one size fits all. You could take bits or all of these, and there'll be something in it for you. But it's got to be particular to your business and your business requirements in there. And really, that was just a whistle-stop tour of routes to funding these. If anyone's got any questions, I'll be willing to answer them as best I can.
Thanks, Jim. No, I think that's really insightful. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Some of the terms, like the grants, in terms of the moving landscape and things, and nothing ever sits still for very long across the board. But there's clearly various routes into unlocking that investment, whatever's right for you at that time. So yeah, we've got a smaller audience today, but I don't know if anybody's got any comments, or I don't see any hands up or anything on that. I mean, quite interesting stuff, to be honest. Yeah. Okay. I think probably yeah. Just kind of summarise off, Jim, and see if anybody has anything they want to add in after that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, so quickly to summarise, if there aren't any questions, just funding, that will accelerate your continuous improvement journey. The result of which will be improved profitability and returns for your stakeholders. It's important we seek out the right type of financing, financing that matches what it is you're investing in and your business requirement, and be sure to maximise the tax breaks. Tax breaks can have time limits as well, so being aware of what's available at that time and when those tax breaks are due to run out, it'll set you in good stead for the journey. Thank you.
As I say, thanks for that, Jim.
Jim, I just have one question actually. You mentioned the capital allowance on equipment. Would that cover IT infrastructure as well? Or is it?
Yes. There's a whole list of. It generally covers IT infrastructure. There's a whole load, plant and machinery, which qualifies. Generally covers things which you will use within your business to make it productive. So computer equipment's in there. There are. So that covers software as well. Software was always an odd one when it came in, or sorry, when it came in, when software came in, as if there is such a thing. But because it didn't really fit the old rules, because plant machinery was very much things that you could touch and and you could hear making things. Software, because it was intangible, was a bit of an anomaly many years ago. But that was pulled right into the plant machinery side of it for obvious reasons.
Okay, and you said that's 130%, is that correct?
There is a super deduction which is due to run out on the 30th of March, or sorry, 31st of March next year. Now, there are certain conditions that need to be met to hit that, to be able to get that 130%, but the general rule is that if it's brand new equipment that you've got, and it falls within the right category, qualifying plant machinery, that you will get 130% tax deduction on that. So it's an additional 30%. Now, the caveat is that with the current leadership elections going on in the Conservative Party, these are things which are fair game at the minute. So so at time of writing, this is due to run out, and also tax rates are due to go up. the corporation tax rates are due to go up at the same time, which is no coincidence.
Okay.
Thanks
for that.
Joe, you've got your... Oh, sorry, Joe O'Neill. Sorry. Other Joe's got his hand up at the moment. Is that okay, Joe, or do you want to come back in on that?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Jim,
Sorry,
thank you.
yeah.
I've just been talking to a number of funders, and they're saying anything that's green, please come and talk to us, because there's a definite tip to that. So even answering Joe's question, any kit that people buy now has got to be greener than the stuff they used to buy. So perhaps there's an argument to say that the investments going forward might meet some of that green agenda. So it's really just to flag that up. And the banks love manufacturing companies, mainly because they've got assets. They're not really that fond of software and app companies as they speak to me, because there's not an awful lot they can kind of get behind. But so I think that's a kind of good news for our sector, but you still have to unlock it. But I just wondered if you had come across similar things as well, you know, make it green and we're really up for it.
Well, I think there's the general movement in there, and you look at the competitive advantage of this as well, because of you're looking at resilience and future proofing. So there are certain tax incentives available for energy saving equipment now. I think there might have been some movement in that in the last couple of years, but certainly there have been in the past. I'm not sure what the position is at the minute, but certainly what we would talk to people about in the past was if you're doing out a fact, you're building a new factory, there are certain things which will unlock better benefit than they are and than you would get otherwise. And maybe increase ceilings, because the other big thing that's coming up is the annual investment allowance, which has been up at £1 million for the annual investment allowance is where you get capital allowances at 100% on the right, on expenditure on plant and equipment, and you get that up front. So you get that again as a deduction against profits. So if you spend up to £1 million, you would get £1 million tax deduction against your profits. That's been £1 million for a few years now. It's due to drop to 200,000 again in April 23. Which is huge. If you think about, I've got a couple of worked examples which I can circulate after this, but looking at interaction of annual investment allowance with the super deduction, because it's these are separate things. But and it was, and I can't confirm that's the case, that was that if you were looking at energy saving or more green equipment, these limits didn't apply. You were getting different allowances for them. So again, it's quite a changing landscape, and I'm expecting it to be changing quite a lot over the next few years, depending on the government appetite, party appetite. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, pretty well. I believe the funders they are saying to me, if people are looking for stuff that has the net zero, the chances of getting funding is higher, as guess what they're saying, but that doesn't mean it's simple. But they've certainly said that.
All right, okay, thank you. I'll close this there and thank everybody for their time and for those who inputted this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.